Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're tackling how Singapore is getting creative with energy management, using something called demand flexibility. Our source today is a press release from the Energy Market Authority, or EA, about some really cool new initiatives they're rolling out. And what really got my attention was that demand response programs have already saved over $700 million. Like, wow, that's in their wholesale electricity market. So that got me thinking, how much untapped potential is out there? And what innovative ways is Singapore using to find these savings?
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And just to be clear, that 700 million, that's just from lowering peak demand prices. And get this, a recent study actually found over 400 megawatts of untapped potential just sitting there. So the question is, where is that 400 megawatts hiding?
Okay, so for those of us who aren't energy experts, can you break this down a little? Like, what exactly is demand flexibility, and why should we even care about it?
So demand flexibility basically means being able to adjust how much electricity you're using and doing that based on what the power system needs at any given time. You
Yeah.
know, imagine if your energy use could be a bit more flexible.
Okay, so like, instead of everyone blasting their AC at the same time when it's super hot out.
Exactly. If we can shift some of that energy use to off-peak times, then we don't overload the grid. Think of it like rush hour traffic. If everyone could tweak their commute just a little, traffic would flow so much smoother. Less congestion, fewer problems, and maybe even lower costs for everyone.
So it's not about using LSS electricity, it's about using it smarter. And I see businesses are a big part of Singapore's plan. Why is that?
Well, businesses usually have more flexibility built into what they do. Like, think about a factory. They could maybe shift some production to nighttime or adjust when they run processes that use a lot of energy.
Wouldn't that mess up their workflow? Why would they want to participate?
That's where Singapore's Demand Response Program comes in, or DR for short. It's all voluntary. Businesses reduce their usage during peak times, and in return, they get a share of the savings from the wholesale electricity market.
So everybody wins, the grid is more stable,
Yeah.
and businesses get rewarded. But how easy is it for them to actually join this DR program?
Well, the EMA has been working on making it easier. For example, they had this 2-year sandbox program. It basically let businesses try out DR with fewer rules and no penalties.
Interesting. Did it work? What kind of results did they see from the sandbox?
The results were amazing. They more than doubled the amount of DR capacity that was registered. Like, it went from 46 megawatts to over 103 megawatts. It seems like businesses, especially smaller ones, were much more open to trying it out when it was less risky.
Makes sense. So now that the sandbox is over, what happens next?
Well, the EMA took the things that worked from the sandbox and made them part of the regular DR program, so those lower compliance thresholds are here to stay, which is great news for businesses who want to join.
So they're always tweaking things based on what they learn. That's pretty cool.
Hmm.
But getting businesses on board is just one piece of this puzzle, right? What other innovative things is Singapore trying?
They're really thinking outside the box. One really cool new thing is they're adding battery energy storage systems to the DR program. We call those BSS for short. And any business with a BS under 10 megawatts can apply to join starting in February 2025.
Hold on, I need to catch up. How do batteries fit into this whole demand flexibility thing?
Okay, so picture this. A business charges up their BSS overnight when demand is low and electricity is cheaper. Then, when peak hours hit, they use the energy from the battery instead of pulling a bunch of power from the grid.
Ah, so it's like a backup power tank. That helps them avoid those crazy peak demand prices. This sounds almost too good to be true.
Well, it definitely has its challenges. Like, BSS can be expensive, and getting them to work perfectly with the grid can be tricky. But there's huge potential, especially as battery tech gets better and cheaper.
This whole BES initiative sounds like a game changer, especially for smaller businesses that can't just shift their operations around as easily. But storage isn't the only way to move energy use around, right? The press release also mentioned something about using EV charging stations.
Oh, yeah. They've got this pilot program going with Comfort Delgro, the taxi company. They're using their network of almost 1,000 EV charging stations. And the idea is to tweak the charging speeds based on what the grid needs at that moment.
So if the grid is getting overloaded, they could slow down charging to take some of the pressure off. But what about the drivers? Wouldn't they be annoyed if their car took longer to charge?
That's a really important point. They have to find that balance between the grid's needs and making sure drivers are happy. One idea is to offer cheaper charging rates during off-peak hours. It's all still in the early stages, but it's a really cool example of how we can turn everyday things into part of a flexible energy system.
This is pretty wild. All these different parts coming together to make the energy system more flexible, like some kind of energy ballet or something.
Yeah, it's like a dance. Everything's moving together. Speaking of how things work, let's talk about the demand response mechanism itself. Remember, the goal is to lower electricity demand when those prices spike. So, though, how do they actually make that happen?
Right. It can't be as easy as sending out an email that's like, hey, everyone, use less power right now.
Haha. No, it's definitely more complex than that. They use this system of demand bids. It's basically where participants offer to cut back their usage, and in return, they get paid.
So it's like, instead of an auction where you're trying to buy something, this is like a reverse auction where you're bidding on how much you can reduce your energy.
You got it. Businesses can submit bids. They say how much electricity they're willing to reduce and at what price. Then the EMA looks at all the bids and chooses the ones that give them the most bang for their buck.
So the businesses that win, they get paid for saving energy.
Yep. They get paid based on how much they reduce and what the wholesale market price is at that time. It keeps people motivated to participate and make sure they're getting the most reduction possible without spending a fortune.
This system makes sense. It rewards the folks who can cut back the easiest and the cheapest. But I'm curious, does this really make enough of a difference during those peak times?
Well, the DR program has been really successful so far. Remember those $700 million in savings we talked about? That shows you the power of demand flexibility.
It's true, but those savings don't just appear out of thin air. How do they actually calculate and distribute all that money to the people participating?
So, the incentive payment that DR participants get is based on how much they help lower those wholesale electricity prices. The more they reduce during those peak times, the bigger their share of the savings.
It sounds like a pretty fair system. Makes it worth it for businesses to get involved. But let's get into the nuts and bolts. What kind of equipment are we talking about here? What actually needs to be changed to reduce energy use?
The press release highlights a few main areas. Production equipment in factories is one.
So factories could change their production schedule or turn off some machines during peak hours.
Exactly. Then you have HVAC systems.
Yeah.
Those are the heating and cooling systems in big buildings. They use a ton of energy, so optimizing temperature settings, adjusting fan speeds, even using pre-cooling strategies can help.
It's amazing how small tweaks to everyday things can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't forget about BES and EV charging stations. They're going to play a bigger and bigger role and offer even more ways to manage how we use energy.
It's like they're the future of energy,
Yeah.
showing us what's possible.
Totally. So remember, demand flexibility isn't just one thing. It's a bunch of different tools and strategies. And the cool thing is, Singapore is using all of them to make their energy system stronger and more adaptable.
But a system this big, it can't change overnight. What does the EMA do to coordinate all these different efforts?
The EMA is really important here. They provide the framework, the incentives, and the guidance to make all of this happen. They're like the architects, making sure everything works together.
Like they're conducting this orchestra of energy resources, each instrument playing its part to make this beautiful symphony of efficiency and resilience.
That's a good one. And, demand flexibility is about more than just saving money or making the grid run better. It's about changing how we think about energy.
Not just taking it for granted,
Yeah,
but actively managing it and being part of the solution.
exactly. It's a shift from just using energy passively to actively engaging with it and shaping a more sustainable energy future.
It's a great vision, but how realistic is it? Can we really expect regular people to be this involved in managing their energy?
That's the big question. It's going to take a collective effort for sure. We need to educate people, raise awareness, but we're already seeing things change.
Like those smart home devices that let you track and control your energy use.
Exactly. And as tech keeps getting better and more connected, there are going to be even more ways for people to get involved. Imagine your appliances automatically adjusting their energy use based on real-time grid conditions and pricing.
That's like having a personal energy assistant working in the background to save you money.
That's the idea.
But what about people who don't have access to that kind of tech or can't afford it? Will they be left behind?
That's a valid concern. We need to make sure this new energy system is fair for everyone, not just those who can afford the fancy gadgets.
So we need a system that's not just efficient and reliable, but also fair and inclusive. That's a tall order. But it seems like Singapore's on the right track. But let's be real for a second. What are some of the challenges and limitations of this whole demand flexibility thing?
Well, one big one is just how complicated it is. We're trying to get businesses, homes, batteries, electric cars, and the power grid itself
Hmm.
to all work together smoothly.
It's a huge task. And what about people? Are they even willing to change their habits and adapt?
That's another big challenge. We need to help people understand why demand flexibility matters, give them incentives,
Hmm.
and the right technology. I think if we do that right, we can create an amazing new energy future.
It's inspiring to see Singapore leading the way. But what about the rest of us? What can we learn from them?
Singapore is unique for sure, but there are lessons we can all take away. Like the fact that demand flexibility isn't just some sci-fi idea, it's a real solution. That can make a difference.
It's about being smarter with how we use energy, using new technology, and working together to create a better energy future for everyone. We're really seeing a huge shift in how we think about energy these days. It's not just something we use, it's something we need to manage and be a part of.
It's a really exciting time to be in this field. Technology is changing so fast, policies are evolving, and people are finally starting to understand how important this is.
Speaking of which, the EMA press release had this cool visual, figure 2, I think it was. It showed all the different groups involved in demand flexibility, like factories, HVAC systems in buildings, battery storage,
Yeah.
and EV charging stations.
Yeah, it really drives home the point that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's all about building a system where everything works together.
Like a well-oiled machine. But how does this affect the everyday person in Singapore? What changes will they actually see in their lives?
For a lot of people, the changes will be small at first. Maybe their electricity bill goes down a little, or the lights don't flicker as much when everyone's using a lot of power. But those small things add up, and over time, it means a more reliable and affordable energy system for everyone.
And as this technology becomes more common, I bet we'll see even more ways for people to get directly involved. Like, imagine getting a notification on your phone
Yeah.
telling you to run your dishwasher later tonight so you can get a cheaper rate.
Exactly. Or your electric car, knowing when to charge. So it's using renewable energy when it's available. Energy management will just become part of our lives.
That's a future where we're all part of the solution.
And that's what makes this so exciting. It's not just about tech or money. It's about giving people the power to create a better energy future.
Singapore is giving us a sneak peek at what that future could look like.
Yeah.
It's a journey with its challenges, but definitely one worth watching.
Here's something to think about. As we use more and more electricity, demand flexibility will become even more important. So the question is, what can each of us do to make our energy future more flexible and sustainable?
It's a question we should all be asking. And, as we've seen today, the answers can be found everywhere, from our homes and workplaces to our cars, and even in the choices we make every day. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into demand flexibility in Singapore. Until next time, stay curious.